Hi, I'm Phil Bass, meat science faculty at the University of Idaho, and this is a video made in conjunction with Fair, Idaho. We're going to break down the rib and plate. Now, this whole continuation of meat is a very old cut known as the wing, and as you can see, if I turn it over this way, kind of indeed looks like a wing, like a that's a pterodactyl, by the way. So anyway. So we'll flip this back over and start working through some of the really cool cuts that come out of the wing. There's a lot of very valuable pieces that come out of here. We're going to separate the rib from the plate and take a little bit more of a contemporary spin to this. Normally we would cut right about here down the middle of everything. But that's going to cut into our skirt steak, and then also our really nice short ribs that sit right here. Short ribs are indicated by that highly marbled piece of meat known as the serratus ventralis. And we're going to take a section right out of the middle of that short rib, okay? So the first thing we're going to do is actually remove this outside skirt steak. The outside skirt steak is the diaphragm muscle, the breathing muscle of the animal. It has a really heavy piece of connective tissue membrane surrounding it, and so we're going to remove that. We're going to cut right at the very end of that skirt steak, and following just right at the edge of the muscle itself, to break that membrane into two pieces. By doing that, we can then grab hold of that membrane and just kind of peel it right off of there. This membrane is called tunic. Tunic is made of something called elastin, and elastin is a connective tissue, a chewy stuff, that does not break down very well under heat, and so it needs to be removed. Once that's done, we also have more elastin on the backside here, but let's go ahead and just peel that skirt steak out first. You find the hinge of the diaphragm and simply cut right at the base of that hinge. And that's going to take nearly all of the diaphragm right up and out. Now, to prepare this for grilling is we just need to take off the rest of this membrane. You find one end and just begin to peel it away. Now, take the big part of your hand and kind of push down as you're peeling it, because the diaphragm, the breathing muscle, is a very tender piece of meat, and it will actually tear with the membrane if you don't push down and be very careful not to tear it. Once that's removed, again, that just kind of goes by the wayside. It's more of that chewy elastin. The outside skirt steak is a very tender piece of meat, can go right onto the grill. It's good to maybe trim a little bit of this extra fat off, just so you don't have any flare-up. Super tasty, a strong, robust flavor, and great for just about any Latin American cuisine. Outside skirt steak. Okay, back to the wing. Now we need to separate the rib section from the plate. The way we're going to do that is actually just find about 2 inches from the base of the eye muscle. That's this muscle right here. That's the longissimus muscle on both ends. Okay? So we'll go about 2 inches off of there and make a mark. Go about 2 inches from there. Make a mark. And now we can draw a line all the way across there. You can say I use the back side of my knife to do that. I don't want to dull my knife. Then, if you have a bandsaw, it's a very quick zip on that bandsaw. For this, I'm going to go ahead and just use the handsaw. So we've cut through all 7 ribs. We'll finish the cut using my boning knife. That leaves us with a plate and a rib. We'll come back to the rib. Let's work on the plate first. So the plate does have these beautiful short ribs, and these are long bone short ribs that we're going to be able to capture. The way we're going to do that is actually find the base of that serratus ventralis, that muscle that makes a short rib a short rib. It's usually very, very well marbled, and you can see it on this more anterior side, or the side that was removed from the chuck. And we're going to make a mark right at the base of those, okay? So we're going to get quite a bit of big short rib out of here, but really we can only capture the first 3 of those bones that are on there. The rest of this will go to trim. We'll go ahead and cut through that with the handsaw. And again, if you do have a bandsaw, it's a quick cut as well. We'll finish that cut with my boning knife. Now what we're left with on this side, this is known as navel pastrami, or just the bone-in navel of the beef rib or the beef plate. This can be boned out, and you can make a very traditional pastrami with it. You can also make a beef bacon with it as well. This has been fabricated in a certain way, however, to remove from the hind quarter to capture more of the inside skirt steak. And so for beef bacon, this probably won't be a great piece of meat for it, but we can still make some great trimmings for ground beef. Now, as I said, you really only get to capture the first 3 rib bones out of this plate. And the reason for that is that's where the termination of our serratus ventralis happens, okay, right about there. That's that really highly marbled piece of meat that makes the short rib, okay? So we'll count off 1, 2, 3, and I'm gonna crowd that very last rib over here, that next rib, the 4th one in line, just so I can get a little bit more meat on my short rib. So what's left is, as you can see, there's really hardly any serratus ventralis left, so it's no longer short rib. This can be trimmed out for ground beef trimmings as well. You'll want to bring some lean in, maybe from the round or parts of the chuck. For these 3-bone short ribs, you could take it yet another step and peel this outer layer off, just to make it a little bit more trim. This outer layer is rib lifter meat. And lifter meat can be used for stew meat, for cubed steak, or yet again, just some ground beef trimmings. But it's very, very lean, and once it's cleaned up, you can see it's very straight grain, so easy to carve. This takes us down to our long bone short ribs. Kind of sounds a little funny, but they're definitely ribs that have been shortened. From those long bone short ribs, you can leave them full length, or they can be cut again, either with a bandsaw or a handsaw, to shorten them down, to make them a little bit more manageable if all you have is a slow cooker. Very traditional barbecue operations now are leaving them full length and kind of calling them dinosaur short ribs or brontosaurus style short ribs. They're very cool presentation, and they taste excellent. So that leaves us with the remainder of the wing, which is the rib primal. And it's a shortened rib primal, of course, because we've removed the plate a little bit closer than what we would have done classically speaking many decades ago. But that's okay because it's down now to a very manageable piece of meat that we can turn into our either bone-in or boneless ribeye. And that's your traditional prime rib. Next thing I need to do is actually use a bandsaw and cut away this section of bone to make it easier to get underneath these bones. So I've removed what's called the chine bone. Now, if you don't have a bandsaw, you can absolutely cut this with a handsaw, but since I did have one handy, I used it. It makes it a lot simpler, a lot easier, but you can absolutely still do it with a handsaw. This is called the chine bone, and it's an old English term for chain, links in a chine, links in a chain. This is the spinal column where the spinal cord once sat. This is removed, and really it's just some backbone and not a lot of application, so I'm going to just set this aside. But by removing that, I've now made it easy to cut down into the meat of the bone-in rib. What I want to do next is peel back these feather bones. These are the dorsal processes of the thoracic vertebrae. And eventually I'll be able to cut away these ribs to make a boneless prime rib. All right, so now I'll just go right in behind those feather bones and start peeling them back. If you want to, you can be really precise and go in and out and remove each one individually. I like to take them all as one. It's a little bit more efficient, and it makes a cleaner looking prime rib in the end. Follow that out. Not a lot we can do with this, so I'm just going to set that aside as well. Once that's gone, I can start to open this seam up and look at removing this cap right here. Okay? This is the rib cap, not to be confused with the ribeye cap, which is actually this really tasty piece of meat right here, the spinalis dorsi. The rib cap comes right up and along here into this fat seam. So I'm going to turn up, and starting at that fat seam, we're going to open this guy right up. That's going to allow me to leave a little extra fat right here, which keeps a nice contour on that prime rib. So once we roll that out, now we have some great lean that can be extracted from this cap. You have more of that lifter meat right in here that can be used for stew meat, cube steak, shaved steak, or something like that, or just ground beef trimmings as well. Definitely make sure that this little bit of scapula, this cartilage, is removed before you make this into ground beef, of course. One more step before we can call this a bone-in prime rib. We have to remove this piece right here. This is a ligament that helps hold the big heavy head up on the animal, and it goes all the way down into the back to this section right here. This is elastin, very chewy stuff. And so we need to remove that, especially for a cut like this that we're expecting, or your customers are expecting, a really tender piece of meat. That leaves us with an export-style prime rib, or an export-style ribeye. This is a bone-in ribeye. It has about a 2-inch tail on each side. You can make that 3-inch, whatever you prefer. And it does have those rib bones on there. Now, if you have a bandsaw, you could just put this on here and cut whatever thickness steak you want. Or you can cut steaks in between those rib bones, but those are going to be a lot thicker. They're also really nice presentation. For this case, however, I want to take this down to a boneless ribeye. And so what I'm going to do is follow along the seam right here and remove those rib bones. That'll leave me with beef back ribs, which are super tasty, and then a boneless ribeye that I can cut into steaks. I'm really feeling with the tip of my knife right now where those rib bones are, because I don't want to take too much meat away from the ribeye itself. That's going to be a much more valuable piece. However, I am still trying to leave a little bit of that meat known as finger meat. That's the meat in between the ribs. Leave that attached to the ribs so that the ribs still have some meat on them. So now we have cleaned back ribs and then a boneless prime rib. Now this could be left just like that as a roast, but I'm going to go ahead and cut this into ribeye steaks. As I'm cutting, I'm trying to see the angle of this face right here. This is where we separated the hind quarter from the forequarter. And as you can maybe see, it's a little different from the starting angle over here. And so I'm just adjusting ever so slightly as I go along to optimize and maximize my yield. I don't want just a little sliver of a piece at the very end. I want to still have a nice squared up steak at the end. And so as I'm cutting, I'm adjusting just ever so slightly so that I don't have a wedge-shaped steak at the very end. And so now I've optimized those steaks from end to end. There's all of my ribeye steaks. It's probably a good idea that if you are operating a retail outlet, to maybe trim these ends up just a little bit. If it's for your home use, it's entirely up to you. But oftentimes, final customers like to see just a little bit cleaned up tails on these things. So that's the fabrication of the beef rib and plate, also known as the wing in its entirety. For more information, reach out to Fair Idaho, and as always, go beef.